Hello everyone and welcome back to House, the Shared Living podcast. This is the penultimate episode in this season, which is our 5th, but we will be back for one more week, which will be our special Q&A episode. So please keep the questions coming in via WhatsApp, voice note and email. And most importantly, please do contact us if you think there is anything we've missed talking about in the last few weeks of the season. And we also have a very special episode with some amazing people from the sector in the lead up to Christmas. But today, let's get on with our show. I'm Deenie from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And I'm Dan from Resi Consultancy and VerbaFlow AI.
And I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategists.
And first, a word from our headline sponsor.
Season 5 of Housed, sponsored by mystudenttools.com. List your properties commission-free and reach thousands of students searching for their university home.
Dan and the team from My Student Halls have been supporters of House since the beginning, and we are incredibly grateful that they're here once again as headline sponsors of Season 5. And we are pleased to say they will be joining us again in Season 6. So huge thank you for continuing to partner with us. And a big thank you too also to Wash Station and Utopia for coming back and sponsoring Housed once again next season. We'll hear more from them later. First, Dan, I think you had a busy week last week. You were both at the PropTech Awards and Cubo. Can you give us an update from both those events?
I can, yes. I'd love to be winding down for Christmas, and it is the absolute opposite of that. I am ramping up for Christmas. Last week was the UK PropTech Association Awards held in London in Covent Garden. And I haven't been to one before, didn't know what to expect, but it was quite a casual affair. You sort of rock up to a bar, and then there is a stage there where they are basically talking about the PropTech sector and the state of it, and then they launch into some of the awards. It's actually quite refreshing, I'll be honest, because it's done quite quick. It's not the sort of black tie some of these awards can be, and so I found it was quite nice to just spend a few hours there with the VerbaFlow team, VP and Vikas, and meeting a lot of people within the sector. There were some reasonably familiar faces, Bradley Bartlett, who's a recruiter within the sector, but also James Ragg from Student Cribs, who was up for some awards. And then VerbaFlow was up for an award as well. And shock horror, we didn't win, but I'd practiced my disappointed face, so wasn't really expecting to. A company called Watergate won it, and I didn't feel it was necessary to sort of storm the stage, but like Kanye West. I actually didn't even know we were up for it, to be honest with you. The ones that we're sort of really quite keen on are Property Week, so fingers crossed that we get one of our three awards that we're up for there. But it was just a really good affair, and I think that what was really clear is that the government are really willing on PropTech. There's quite a bit of investment because UK PropTech Association is now part of the BPF, British Property Federation, which is now called REUK, Real Estate UK, just to make it very clear what all of these acronyms are. And the reason that we're making these acronyms clear is that we didn't get selected for the podcast awards because we have far too many acronyms, PBSA, BTR, whatever else. So we're trying to be trying to keep it simple. But the government are actually taking an active role in some of the investment in some of these prop techs, which is really good to see, whether it's through an accelerator or whatever that might be. But overall, just it was a really good affair. Mostly, I would say BTR, so very little in terms of student there. But like I said, good to see James Ragg from Student Cribs there, and then on to Cubo, which is the university business officers, effectively. So anyone who works in universities, the sort of commercial sector, whether it be conferencing, events, or accommodation, catering. And so I was invited by Melissa Brown and the team there. She's the chair of Cubo, to do a bit of a keynote, and I was given carte blanche. So they said I could talk about pretty much whatever I wanted, which it can be a bit of a risky game depending on who the audience is. And I ran it past them, obviously. I didn't just want to go completely rogue. But it was about future-proofing university accommodation. And I think that is one of the more challenging sectors within student accommodation, whether it's, BTR, co-living, student HMO, PBSA, commuter students, or actual university halls. I think there are quite a few headwinds there. I don't want universities to sell the engine to pay for petrol. That was one of my slides, because I do worry that it's such a It's such an asset to have university accommodation that you can control. And I think that a lot of universities are just thinking, right, we'll just get into bed with an operator. We'll do a design, build, fund, operate sort of joint venture partnership. And sometimes that can work really, really well. We've seen some really good ones, and we've seen some that haven't worked quite so well, where prices have been kept irrationally high in certain markets when PBSA has been much more agile. So universities have some significant voids out there. It's the worst year that I can remember, other than COVID. But actually, even then, because this is a normal sales cycle, I think it's been a real struggle. And so yeah, I talked a bit about the future direction of travel. We talked about 2030, which I know we talked about on the last podcast as well. But it feels to me like university halls are actually one step ahead of PBSA because they don't have as much invested in that side of things. They aren't looking for those investor returns, and therefore they don't need to be careful with what they say. And they ultimately didn't look too shocked at me talking about 2030 and the fact that we're going to have a dip in the number of 18-year-olds that drops off by 20% over 10 years. So from where it is now, it'll have dropped by 20 to 25% by 2040 after we hit 2030. That's going to have all kinds of issues and throw up all kinds of challenges for the sector. So we talked about that. We talked about AI at length, and obviously I was able to talk about VerbaFlow and the difference that can make, because staffing is a major problem for universities. They can't get the quality or the caliber of staff on a seasonal basis. They've got some brilliant people working for them year round, but hiring up students to train them up, to then pay them to get their systems licenses, etc. We talked about the systems architectures and how complicated and overburdened they were. I had to be a little careful with what I was saying. We had Starres and Kinetics and Lavanda in exhibiting. And so I was reasonably measured with talking about legacy systems, shall we say. But I was also able to then talk about some of the reasoning behind PBSA's success, because it has been a success at the expense of university halls to a certain extent. And one of the reasons that I think people hadn't really appreciated was the fact that international education agents sell university courses to international students, and they make a huge commission, between sort of 10 to 20%, depending on the course, of tuition fees each year. So that's a whacking great commission there. And what happened during COVID is that they started to realize, actually, we need to start thinking about marginal gains here. What other services can we sell into these students? Because we're not making as much revenue as we normally would. And some of that is the nature of the market maturing as well, the international education agent market. And so what they've started to do is, where they weren't getting accommodation commission from the universities, they've started diverting students away from university halls and into PBSA and BTR. They've either done that direct through partnerships with operators, or they've done that with partnerships with marketplaces. So rather than your normal rite of passage, which is you do your application for your course, you get accepted onto your course, you then automatically go into the university halls of residence, or at least that's what is pushed to you by the agent typically. They are starting to be diverted away into PBSA, because PBSA or the marketplaces are paying them. And that has been a bit of a wake-up call, I think. There were very few people in the room that actually really knew that was happening. Now, I talked about this 18 months ago or so at ICEF when we were all in Amsterdam. And again, that was a bit of a revelation there. There were a few marketplaces there saying, quiet, please don't talk about this, because, it's really something that we don't really want to talk about. But yeah, there was some gasps when I was presenting some of those slides. So hopefully it added a bit of value. I certainly enjoyed the feedback I got there and then. But
on that topic, Dan, we have spoken to universities about it, and I think because the commission is so high for the courses, some of the ones that we've spoken to are almost unbelieving that an agent would bother to refer accommodation when they might only get £200, £300 commission per room. And we're like, no, this happens. This is a thing. People, make have whole companies that do this thing. And I think there has been a little bit of kind of naivety about that happening, and I'm really glad that you called it out, because for a lot of students, being amongst other first year students or other postgraduate students on campus, can be the best experience that they'll get. So diverting them into PBSA that might be a bit further away from campus, might be amongst other students from other universities. It's great to have an option. But if the university shouldn't have void beds if their students are being diverted somewhere else, that should never be the outcome.
Yeah, I think the other thing that was really interesting from all that, because marketplaces give with one hand and take away with the other. Now, part of my messaging as well to the university halls was go and list with these marketplaces. You have to start paying them commission. And, that'll be music to the ears of every marketplace out there. And obviously concerning for university halls because they're going to be having to give away more revenue. But what would you rather have? Would you rather have, slightly less revenue, give away 5% of that? Or would you rather have a void room where you're not getting anything? No, I'd rather. So I would hope that we would start to see more university halls advertising on the marketplace platforms. And I think that's also key for AEO, which is answer engine optimization. So basically, you've got SEO, search engine optimization, which is about your typical Google search, which is quite old school now, and then AEO, which is focused on what ChatGPT sees and what ChatGPT is using as a source for the answers that it's giving about. If you search, find me the best student accommodation in Bournemouth, for example, if you asked for the sources straight away, the number one by a country mile would be student crowd. So fair play, Paul and Thule, they've really got a very credible platform there that is becoming the oracle of all things student accommodation. And then it would list marketplaces. And that's because they've got the sheer volume. And then further down, there would be university halls. And then further down beyond that would be PBSA operators, again, because they just don't have the scale. So I think there's a balance here. I do think university halls need to be listing with marketplaces. I would do that quite carefully. I'd be quite strategic about it and make sure that it's also done via agents as well. So those key agents that they've got, where if you search on a university accommodation, a university website, you'll see that there are agents listed there, whether it be Edwise in India or IDP or the Chopra Group or New Orient or whoever it might be. They're all listed on those websites. Well, each of those agent partners should be contracted to make sure that they are passing accommodation as a first preference to the university. There is just no excuse for that not going into the contract. And if that student then really doesn't want it, then you can say, right, okay, well, now let's look at PBSA. But there's still ways that universities can make money off that too. We've seen several universities do that, charge commission for leads and any, leads that actually confirm. So yeah, I think there's just a lot more commercialization with regards to the revenue process at university halls, with regards to the marketing and the sales funnel, for sure.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, Dan. I think that's what I was going to say, is that actually there is other ways that universities can be more controlling in this conversation. And what we've discussed in the past before is actually packaging up courses with accommodation and getting kind of preferential rates that way. So actually when the education agent is selling that course in, it's already attached to accommodation and it's part of that thing. So I think there is, as you say, I think there's more ways that universities can approach this from a commercial aspect, whether that's feeding into what the contracts are signing or packaging things up, but being aware that it's going on and that it's happening is a step in the right direction, and then it's something that can be controlled. So that was really interesting. And I do like what you said about the PropTech Awards. I think there is, we're all going to be, when this is going out, we're all going to have just come back from the Property Week Awards, and as much as it's great and it's a great evening, there's not as much time to speak and chat to people because of the length of the award. So I think that short kind of informal awards is a positive thing. We'll just have a quick break to hear from our sponsors and we'll move on to our next topic. This episode is brought to you by Utopia, the smart building platform that helps real estate owners protect the value of their assets.
From ESG compliance to energy efficiency and resident engagement, Utopia turns real-time data into action, making buildings better for people, planet and profit.
If you're in asset management or operations and care about performance, Utopia is your essential partner. Find out more at utopia.co.uk. That's utopi.co.uk.
A big thank you again to Utopia, who is going to be joining us again in season 6. We're so grateful for their ongoing support of House, which means we can bring it to you every week. So thank you. So last week was a big week in politics because we had our UK budget. I kind of know what I feel about it, but Dan, are you going to be super positive about this budget?
What do you think? I'm willing them on. They are just failing at every turn. And not just within the sector that we're in. I can't remember feeling quite so hopeless about, especially a Labour government. And yeah, I just don't have any good news to report. Yes, I know that 500,000 children have been pulled out of poverty with scrapping the two-child benefit cap. But beyond that, and that one particular headline that very much appeases the left of the party, and I do appreciate, of course, that's a positive. Anytime we're doing that, it's a positive. But where was the other good news, and why are they squeezing the middle so hard? And I think that, when you look at some of the things that were mentioned, and we can start going through each of the points in turn, but I think there is a real chasm between the Labour Party at the moment and the electorate, and the sentiment of the electorate, not just the sentiment of the Labour Party or potential Labour voters. And that's not me saying that I think we should be appeasing the far right and reform and all of that, but I just think they're lacking in real world policies that they can communicate effectively and that are going to make a positive difference. They're either not talking about the fact that we all really need to play our part. This is what it looks like now. This is what it will look like in the future. This is why we're doing it. And I think it's because there's no real leadership. There's no leadership that you can get behind or buy into. Rachel Reeves is on thin ice. Keir Starmer is showing that, unfortunately, he is absolutely not adept at personality politics, in the same way that we were hoping that there might be, Tony Blair kind of character coming in. And for all his faults, Tony Blair was an incredible politician, very adept at, the sort of international and geopolitical as well as the domestic politics. Keir Starmer is unfortunately not nailing any of this. And it then creeps down into the cabinet of, they're all, just think about the 1.5 million homes target. The likelihood is, on current projections, there'll be at least 40 to 50% shy of that come the end of the parliament, at which point Steve Reid needs to resign, because that's what he's pledged. And I think there's just such a lack of reality in where we're up to. I'm rapidly losing faith, to be completely honest.
Yeah, it was disappointing. And I think just looking at it from a perspective from kind of House and our listeners, it feels very much that the focus was on that if we build all these houses, then that alleviate a lot of the problems. But there was nothing in it seemingly to help build those houses. So it's just on a whim and a prayer.
But also, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking all the things that we've talked about that could be problematic for landlords moving ahead, and obviously imposing a tax increase on landlords' rental income from April 2027, where rental profits will be taxed at higher rates. So obviously, we know that they have to raise more money. So I'm not necessarily surprised at that. But it's like, actually, those homes could end up for sale if landlords decide they don't want to take the hit on that, along with the Renters' Rights Act, along with increasing the environmental standards and the actual property standards in our ABS law. They might decide. So technically, those properties won't necessarily come out of circulation, but they may not be available to people to rent. So it's kind of like, actually, and also to our points over the last year and a half of recording House, there's a massive black hole in large houses that older people are living in. And I feel like, actually, you don't necessarily need to build 1.5 million homes, because a lot of the homes are already there. I thought that they might reduce stamp duty for like over 70-year-olds or something to get them moving. That wasn't there. But also, they're kind of not, I don't know if it's respecting is not the word, but I guess not acknowledging the important role that landlords play in housing people. So a lot of those problems with the housing crisis, actually, I think they might have made worse.
I think even the Office for Budget Responsibility have said that the changes risk contributing to a steady long-term rise in rents. So that's always going to have an impact. And I was also thinking about the mansion tax, which on the surface probably sounds like a good thing if you can afford it. But there's a lot of people, especially in London, that are going to hit that and probably sell up. So that's just pushing more people into those homes that families need. And actually, it's just going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, I mean,
so it's kind of not really thinking it all through.
Well, but this is it. But they've had enough of an opportunity, and they've got there's some really credible bodies that they could listen to. And it's almost like they're suspicious of any of these bodies. And I know that Ben Beadle from the National Residential Landlords Association is just I see the videos he puts on like LinkedIn, and it's just he's so frustrated. Everybody is so frustrated with the approach the government is taking. And like I said, I am willing Labour on here. I really want them to nail it, but they are failing at every turn. And it's things like, the international student levy. I mean, what is that going to do? And then you think about how they are almost demonising residential landlords. And actually, renting is one of the solutions to the housing crisis here. And I think that they talked about it being a budget for Benefit Street, and I do worry that that is the way that everything is going to continue to be perceived, and maybe that's a calculated risk, and they think that they're going to they're going to win the next election by focusing on on people who are potentially on benefits, but either way, everyone else gets squeezed in the meantime.
But that doesn't make any sense because they haven't raised local housing allowance, so housing benefit, basically it remains frozen. So but if Deenie's right and the rent is going to go up because there's going to be less homes to rent and landlords are having additional expenses, then they're going to have to give more people housing benefit because they won't be able to afford the rent, and that's been self-fulfilling basically,
unless they can build more houses. But they can't build more houses because they've not focused on building more houses. And this is the thing. It's kind of it's all focused on something that they've said themselves is extremely difficult to do.
And they kept saying we've sorted the planning regime out. Like we've thrown 300 extra people at the planning regime, extra planning officers. Bullshit. That's not going to touch the sides. It genuinely won't. You could put that into London, and that might make a bit of difference. Get London building, but then it's the archaic processes behind that. Of course, then the Building Safety Act. So many people I speak to now are like, we aren't touching anything over a certain height because we do not want to fall into any of the gateways and this, that, and the other. There is far too little foresight. It is governing by headlines at the moment. And just another thing that came up at Cubo actually was me saying, like, I don't think the direction of travel for higher education is positive in many ways. Now I've and that's a really sweeping statement, and just to clarify that, what I mean is that there are a few places that are saying, well, we should see an increase in international students and domestic students. It's more and more students should keep going to university, but the government right now are saying, scrap that. Tony Blair was wrong. 50% of school leavers do not need to go to university. What we want to do is we think 2/3 of school leavers from the age of 16 should go on to some kind of next level education, not necessarily university. Now, I think given their tendency to focus on apprenticeships, the conversation at each of these universities, with each of these universities at Cubo was, well, where are you going to get the jobs from? Because you need a job at the end of it. You need a sponsor from you need a company to sponsor you going right the way through university. And I think that is going to be a major problem, that those roles are going to dry up. Apprenticeships are going to become absolute gold dust because in an era of AI, everyone needs to be so focused on what they want to do at the end of their degree, rather than, I'll just do French and politics, or I'll just do business studies and then see what happens. I don't think you're going to be able to afford to do that within the next 3 to 5 years, because you're going to need to know exactly what your role is going to be out the back of your degree. And the government are not helping things there. They've put another 725 million to go towards making the training of under 25 apprentices free for small and medium-sized firms. Fine. how can you support apprenticeship degrees? That 725 million will go very, very fast. If you're really trying to ramp up, if you're trying to wind down the number of students going to university to do some spurious courses, and you're trying to ramp up actual, leading into, which I agree with, by the way, I think apprenticeships are going to be a very viable option for everyone who leaves school. And I know they're working very well for people I know now. But yeah, again, just a real lack of strategy around higher education, around housing, which are the two key things that we tend to focus on. And they have not listened to anyone. Every single body that I speak to is like, well, we've tried lobbying, but they aren't listening. So yeah, just a huge frustration all round from my side.
Well, there is a strategy. They're just not being very transparent about it, and it doesn't feel like a strategy that is supporting higher education. It feels like it's one of saying higher education is going to be for an elite number of subjects, which we will say is the ones that we need. And yes, we'll put that funding through to apprenticeships, which, I support apprenticeships, but I think there's a way that higher education apprenticeships don't need to compete. Actually, it's just another way to study. And actually, you can do that through your university and through an employer. But like you say, Dan, you do need an employer when it comes to an apprenticeship. And, in many ways, it's great that they're going to spend a lot of money on making training free for many small businesses to hire an apprentice, but they've got to be able to afford to hire an apprentice. And there was nothing in that budget to support small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, and they can't afford it. They're already shouting and saying, we can't afford to run our businesses. So it's damaging higher education whilst trying to build up apprenticeships, which is great. But like you say, you need businesses growing and being productive to enable that to happen. So it was a difficult week for the government, and I think it'll carry on being a difficult week and a difficult year and a difficult next year, and we'll see how it goes. But I think, that there was some things that are going to have a definite impact on higher education, and I think it's something that we will watch as we move forward. But we'll take another quick break to hear from Wash Station.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Wash Station have been fantastic partners of Housed and will be back to support us once again for season 6. We are hugely grateful. Thank you again to Wash Station. So our final topic was something that we picked up by using ChatGPT to discuss, to find out what's going on in shared living and what can we talk about. So when we did a little bit of a search, we were brought on a new term called subscription living, which I hadn't heard of before, and I don't think either of my co-hosts had either. And when I first read it, we kind of got a bit excited about, oh, this might be exciting. What does this mean? Is this a new innovative way of living and renting by kind of taking a diverse range of rental products and subscribing to the bits that you want and the bits you don't want? But sadly, according to ChatGPT, it's really just co-living, renting as it is. So we've just coined another new term when we've got enough new terms as it is that most people don't really understand. But I guess we wanted to have a quick discussion about actually, if we did make subscription living something different, what would that be and what would its benefits be?
I was thinking that at the base level, with no subscription services, you've got HMOs. So you rent either a whole property with your friends or you rent a room in a house, but you don't get anything else, on top of that. That's kind of the basic. So then if you move to PBSA or university accommodation, you could have that as your basic model and everything else is an add-on. If you want the gym, you pay for the gym. If you want to attend social events, you pay for social events. If you want to use laundry, you pay for laundry, which you do anyway in some places, etc., etc. So I was thinking that could be a way to give the students what they want. We know from our youth forum, they've told us that time and time again, they don't want to be paying for things that they don't want to pay for, that there's very little choice. And it could make it really affordable. However, I was thinking, how would anyone manage this? The systems aren't geared up for it. The staffing aren't. How do you police areas, that some people have paid for, that some people haven't? Do you end up with a 2-tier kind of tenant base within a building where some can afford the upgrades and some can't? A lot of the time it's just because they don't want them. It's not necessarily because they can't. Yeah, I don't know. I know that some services are already kind of add-ons, and particularly in BTR, kind of a lot of the social events are kind of paid sort of upgrades. But across the shared living sector, I like the idea. Don't know if it can be executed.
I think it can be. I think it can be. I think there's a, but realistically, what would that look like? Like, would it? It's primarily the gym and maybe some sort of exclusive meeting rooms and study space, and how do you separate that? Maybe even moving into discounts and things like that, or events. I have seen it. I have seen it. Like, I know that in trying out and mobilizing their concept, I think it was either U House or House of Social, but the Vita Group, they sort of launched with some really reasonable rental prices for central Manchester for those assets. And if anyone hasn't been to sort of Circle Square or in and around Manchester to those Vita properties, do take a trip. It's very, very impressive. But because they were mobilizing, I think they wanted to showcase that they have, reasonable low rents, or lower than I think the premium end as people would normally expect. And then through mobilization, I think there was there was a subscription model where you could say, I'll just have the rent. I'm not going to use any of the facilities or anything like, or services or events. And that's fine. Keep it at that. I've just checked the websites though. It looks like now they are very much, doing everything included. So I'm assuming that model either didn't work and it maybe created a two-tier sort of society within it, or that it was more hassle than it's worth from an operational perspective. So I do think there is something to be said for allowing people to say, look, I'm not going to have, maybe I'm not going to have the breakfast, or maybe I'm not going to have or use the gym. I think there are potential, savings there where you could say to a resident, fine, don't pay for it. That's all right. You can take that off your rent, or you don't have to opt into that. But yeah, Sarah, my worry would then be, obviously you're creating a two-tier society within each of your assets or within your brand. So quite how realistic it is, I don't know. I think that it's worth trying. I think it's worth looking at, and maybe a tech focused operator who isn't really too worried about staffing or really creating that community could do that. And I'm not being disparaging by saying an operator that doesn't care about community. I mean, think about like a Pure Gym where there's quite often no one on reception, and you just get your card, you log in, and away you go. Well, why would you not potentially look at doing that for each of your assets? Same for some hotels where you have to pay for gym access and this, that, and the other. We do need to be thinking about what that looks like, and we could learn some lessons from hospitality there, I think. But how much is that going to be driving down the cost? Is that the focus of it? Is that what we should be thinking? We have subscription living, you've got your basic, and then you can get all of your added extras on there. I don't know. It is an interesting concept. Like I said, I know it's been tried, it hasn't been continued, so maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like something that you could use for bills, in that you could do all-inclusive bills and I kind of pay the one rent, or actually no, I opt to go on a subscription level and actually I'll pay for my bills as I go, thanks, and see how I get on. And that but the technology needs to be in the building to enable to have that. But yeah, it'll be interesting. But I will say, I did just ask ChatGPT who coined the term subscription living, and I got back, good question. I couldn't find any credible source that definitively identifies a single person who coined the term subscription living or subscription-based living. Here's what I found and why the origin seems murky. So maybe ChatGPT just coined the phrase.
They made it up. It doesn't exist, but it was interesting.
No. But you heard it here first, I guess.
Although what I was thinking was, I can imagine what would happen is, in the end, operators would just go, here's an incentive, get it all for free anyway. I think it would be in the too hard box. And if sales were going tough, they would just throw it all in anyway. And then it would end up being special offer, free gym, free upgraded Wi-Fi, free access to the roof terrace, etc. And they would just include it all anyway.
I think we're just too far away from it at the moment. I mean, yes, you could break down the billing from have a meter in each room, that kind of thing, for the utilities, and that is feasible because there are people that are very focused on their usage, or whether it's electricity or whatever. But doing that would probably involve too much of a capex, too much of a cost in build, and then at that point your rents, aren't as affordable as maybe they should be. So yeah, I think there's something in it. We could definitely learn from hospitality, who charge for meeting rooms and printing and Wi-Fi and and gym access at times, or certainly breakfast. But we're in a bit of a tricky spot when it comes to PBSA and BTR to a certain extent. There's some BTR properties and PBSA that are doing great and wouldn't have to worry about using that as an incentive, or, basically using the all-inclusive living as a real selling point. But I would say the majority do. Everyone does have to think, right, let's just make it easy for people to book, because it is not that easy out there to fill your beds. And if you're starting to separate things, that becomes extremely unwieldy when it comes to selling it to residents, whether it's BTR, co-living or PBSA.
So we'll watch this space to see if subscription living becomes a thing, and you can say that you heard it here first. So I think that's all for today. A big thank you to My Student Halls for being our headline sponsor for the season. Your support is hugely appreciated. And of course, thank you to Utopian Wash Station. We are also grateful for your support. As we said at the beginning, the last episode of this series will be next week, and of 2025, and it will be our special Q&A episode. So if you have a question you would like Sarah, Dan or I to answer, or a question we can get an expert to answer, or there's a topic that you would like us to discuss, please email hello@housedpodcast.com, or send any of us a WhatsApp, a voice note or an email, or speak to us if you come and see us. We want to cover all the different asset classes within shared living, so we want your questions about co-living, BTR, PBSA, university accommodation, HMOs and rented later living or subscription living. The juicier the better. So we will see you and answer your questions next week.